Hi, friends. Welcome to the Jill Monaco Show. I'm your host, Jill, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a speaker, author, and life coach. Some weeks I share what God is teaching me, and other times I invite a friend to join me on the podcast, and we chat about what it means to love God, love ourselves, and love others. Here we go. Welcome back to the Jill Monaco Show. Have you ever been stuck in cycles of behavior you don't like or don't know how to change? Do you have trauma from your past? Maybe you've never heard about how that impacts how you think, believe, or feel even now. Or do you know someone who feels like no one can ever forgive them for all the stuff they've done, that they're too far gone for Jesus to fix? Then this episode is for you. If you've been listening for a while, you know that I love bringing you guests who have a heart for teaching freedom. Just when I think I can't find someone more aligned with what I believe or coach, I am proven wrong. My guest today is Jenna Winston. She's a speaker, upcoming author, and prophetic deliverance pastor who was radically saved from mental illness and extreme drug addiction and suicide attempts. Through her radical transformation and inner healing from abuse and trauma, she has a burning passion to lead people into the same freedom, restored identity, and lasting breakthrough. She loves to use her gift as a seer to help people find the root of their issue so they can turn to what God is doing and walk in complete joy and freedom. Before we get to Jenna, I want to ask you to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit as you listen. Is God inviting you into deeper levels of freedom? What part of her story made you feel like she gets me, or God is so good and I want to know him in that way? Let's give God permission to talk to us and heal our hearts. The one thing I know for sure is that the love of God will set captives free. If you've ever had pain in your past, if you're hurting now, or if you're fearful of the future, I want you to know that is not how God wants you to live. Of course, Jesus said we will have trouble in this world, but that should not be our normal. We should be living in the victory and seeing the fruit of that in our lives. We'll talk more about how to do those things in this episode. After this podcast, if you feel like you need someone to help you walk through this or get rid of the lies you've believed, get to the root of an issue, or learn to see yourself as God sees you, then please reach out to me for a freedom coaching session. Jenna also offers heartscaping sessions that can help you too. I'll leave all of these links in the podcast show notes. Okay, my friends, let's head over and hear from Jenna. Hey, Jenna, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, good morning.
I am so glad that you're here with me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
I know, I'm excited.
I noticed last night that you were having a whole lot of fun in Hollywood.
I had a blast last night.
So you were at the Academy Awards, for everyone who's listening to this podcast later. And what I think is so cool is how once people hear your story, like to know that how God has redeemed you and put you into different circles to really help people of influence now, right?
Yes. There's so much I don't post because, a lot of what I do is very confidential because we want to protect that privacy for people with the level of counseling.
Yeah.
But it just has absolutely blown my mind, the doors that he's opened and the connections that he's made. It's like I've just sat back and watched him build everything.
Yeah. So cool. I love it.
It's been amazing.
Oh, it's so fun.
It's fun too. God can be so fun.
Yeah. Well, and, a lot of people that are listening to my podcast know that I bring on friends and people that I know, and I'm so excited for people to hear your story because once they hear where you've been, they will so see how God has been glorified and is glorified in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He's everything.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get to it, if you don't mind. Okay. Let's dig in.
Yeah, no.
So, people probably are going to want to know what happened to you. Everyone has their story. Everyone has their trauma. But for you, it's been a multitude of things. And I know we won't be able to cover it all in one podcast because there's so many pieces. So let's help people understand how the enemy set an assignment against you before you were even born.
Yeah. So my mom got pregnant with me out of wedlock pretty young. I think she was early 20s. And my grandparents freaked out. And I think, I'm pretty sure she was still living at home. And my grandparents forced her to have an abortion. And so she did. And she had told my birth father, and then found out 2 months pregnant, or 2 months later, that she was still pregnant with me. And so there actually had been twins. And then my grandparents wanted her to finish it off. And they literally, as my mom was, they were going to be taking her up to Seattle. I had an aunt and uncle that pretty much went and kidnapped her and hid her out in Longview, Washington, while she finished her pregnancy with me. And she was a nurse at the time. And so I always knew that. I don't
Mm.
ever remember not knowing that.
Mm.
But I think that it definitely planted lies. And also knowing I probably felt a lot of those rejections and stresses and stuff while she was pregnant with me. But I just always had this belief that I was a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be here, that being able to have me was a burden. And so I can look back now and see that there was lies that I already pre-believed before I even got a chance at life.
Yeah.
And so then she had me, and then she met my dad. I think they got married when I was 18 months old, and then he adopted me when I was 4. And things got, I don't know how much more you want me to keep going into that, but
No,
um,
feel free. Yeah, because you suffered
yeah,
a bunch of abuse even as a
yeah,
child then.
yeah. So the household that my dad grew up in, that we spent a lot of time at, was full of so much incest, sexual distortion. I endured so much rape and trauma and molestation, forced from adults, incest with siblings, just really hardcore stuff, and the kind of stuff that you only see in horror movies, you know.
Hmm.
And then when I was 13, my dad got arrested for molesting me, which in the weirdest way was a crazy dynamic. I look back at it now, and the fact is that obviously didn't know anything about spiritual gifts. I didn't know about people that could feel and see and sense things. But because I had endured violent traumas and my dad wasn't violent, it was actually even more of a mess to try and heal from, because I actually knew he hated what he was doing, and I could
Hmm.
sense and feel that he felt horrible for what he was doing and wished that he could stop. And so from a very young age, I adopted this idea and belief system of, I'm going to work really hard not to make you feel bad for what you're doing, even though you're hurting me, because I'm strong and I can take it. And I actually had compassion for people that were doing horrible things to me, and literally genuinely felt horrible for them, and started to pick up emotional responsibility, um to take care of the hearts of people that were hurting me, because it was way more important to have them in my life than be abandoned and be alone. And so my mom, even when he went to jail and he got out of jail, my mom never left him. In fact, they're still together to this day. And when he got home, or when he got out of jail, he wasn't allowed to be in the house for a year. And then when he was allowed to be in the house, he couldn't be at the house alone with me. And that was really inconvenient. And so I got put in a foster home for a year. And even though I had dealt with all of this trauma, we weren't like, we had money, we lived in the suburbs, we went to church, I knew about God. The same hands that, the same person that taught me some of the most beautiful core values about God that I still stand on today were the same hands that took everything from me.
Yeah.
So there was this huge dynamic constantly going on, where it absolutely became normal to have so much compassion and understanding for people that were bad. And so, anyways, all that to say, then, even though those things had happened to me, I still had been very sheltered. I really hadn't been exposed to like the world very much. And so then I end up in this foster home, and it was pretty intense, a lot of things that I'd never witnessed or experienced before that I didn't even know could be a real thing. But the fact is, then the other dynamic that all comes into play, and I think for all girls in some way, shape, or form, was because people didn't know in my family. I'm talking like my grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever. Nobody knew. There wasn't counseling for me. Nobody
Mm.
did. I wasn't getting help. Like nobody was doing anything. Nobody knew what to do or even how to have a conversation with me. So people just bought me stuff. So I had the best clothes. I had, back then, we're talking the 80s. And so, like, I had acid wash Guess jeans and all the kids on the planet and swatches and, everything that was big name brand at the time.
Yeah, I remember that
And,
stuff.
yeah, totally. And it's so funny as name brands are still a huge thing in my life because God talks to me so much through them. But we went back and realized that at that time I literally partnered with these lies that if I had nice things, people would notice that instead of the pain that I'm in.
Mm.
And so that worked great until I went into foster care. Well, then I go into foster care in the most poverty stricken area ever in little Toledo, Washington. That's maybe 200 students from kindergarten to senior
Oh my
year.
gosh.
And here I come looking like Miss Hollywood, which is funny given where I live now, but at the time that was not the case. And so then, of course, people automatically assume that I'm stuck up, I'm mean, I'm this, that. So dealing with rejection and jealousy issues from the kids at school. And so here I am, completely separated from my family, literally feel thrown away to make it comfortable for someone who has completely abused me, living in a house with all these people that don't want to talk to me because I have nice things.
Right.
I was so alone, so alone. And then when I got to move back home and I started my freshman year in high school, poured myself into my friends. I had some of the most amazing friends. I actually really loved high school, but it's because I was completely numbing all my pain with social life.
Yeah.
But then something happened, and I was only a junior in high school when I turned 18 because I was a year older than everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so halfway through my junior year, I turned 18. And on the day of my 18th birthday, I just loaded up my stuff and moved to Oregon and gave my heart to Jesus. Went to a church there that I loved, that some other family members were a part of. And it was kind of like completely flipping a page in a chapter in a book. Just kind of like done with the old, stepping into the new. Had my own apartment while I was going to high school, and as a junior in high school, I had my own apartment and working at McDonald's and going to school.
I can't even
And
imagine like
I know,
having to it sounds like you were such in survival mode
yeah,
that you just
totally.
all you knew how to do was survive. And
Yep.
did you leave because you didn't want to be in the house with your stepdad that had abused you and that was uncomfortable, or what was your thought for leaving?
Actually, to be honest, this is even more morbid. My mom never saw, this is still kind of raw for me.
Mm.
My mom never saw me as a victim. She saw my dad molesting me as him cheating on her.
Wow.
And it was never out and out spoken, but there was undertone comments that my mom feared that when I turned 18, something was going to happen with me and my dad. And even though that was never spoken, that was the undertone. And I wasn't a part of anything because that just the idea of even being around him back then just made me sick.
Yeah.
And I just was eliminating I couldn't handle any more family drama. I just, I left,
Yeah. I can
and
see why.
but at the same time, then my mom also decides to leave my dad. And so they were separated actually for a couple years when I turned 18.
Mm.
And my mom lived in the same town I did for a little bit, but then she went back.
Well, and
And
I find that amazing that when I'm thinking back to part of the story that you said, that when your dad got out of jail and moved back in the house, you were forced to go into foster care. Like, why
yeah,
couldn't he just not? I mean, I understand your mom wanted to work out the marriage, but what was the dynamic around that? What was the thought around that? That you always had to leave and not
Yeah,
him?
and it's because here's the thing. I can look back now. I think that it's one thing to, I walk people in counseling. I walk people all the time through breaking off the lies that they're a burden, that they're bad. A lot of people feel that way. They adopt that belief system even when it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is I look back, and my mom, nobody knew what to do with me. And I was acting out. I did have an attitude because I had all this pain.
Yeah.
I was snotty. I was back talking. And so because nobody knew how to help me, nobody knew what to do with me. My mom's best thing is, in my family, it's always been, if you mess up, your love gets shut off. You get cast aside, you don't get talked to. Um and so it was a lot easier. I look as an adult now, I look back at my mom, and that it's always been like my dad's always kind of been her God. And so with me absent out of the picture, it was going to eliminate
Mm.
um it just made it easier. It
Yeah.
just made it easier for them. And the sassy back talking teenage drama queen, is out of the house. And so everything goes smoothly, because that was the thing. Everything needed to look good. We went to church, we were dressed nice, we had nice things, house was decorated nice, but don't peel back that top layer. And I've always been wired as somebody, not only do I want to peel back the top layer, but I want to get to the roots. And I've
Yeah.
been wired this way as far back as I can remember. And when people don't want their underneath exposed, they will eliminate anything that gets in that way. And I know that's really harsh words. It's really hard to say because I actually love my mom
Yeah.
very much. And I obviously have tremendous compassion, because can you imagine being so broken that if a man molests your daughter, you actually feel bad about yourself? like
Yeah.
that's some pretty brokenness,
Yeah.
so, but the thing is that over time the Lord's really shown me that I can't, pick up the emotional responsibility for her, and I did for a long time.
And so you move out of the house at 18, which
Hmm.
now makes a whole lot of sense.
Yep.
But how did you said you gave your life to the Lord. How did that all happen once you moved out? Did you just start going to church on your own?
Well, okay, so there is a church that my aunt and uncle went to my whole life, and we used to go visit them all the time. So I'd gone to that church once or twice a month, at least once a month for years, since I was like 5 years old. And so I just started going to that church, and even though I was 18, I got involved in the youth group, and it was actually really good. And I got amazing friends that I'm still friends with, but at that point, I think I'd been smoking cigarettes and, doing, little rebellious little things or whatever. I wasn't like into drugs or anything, but um, I started to build relationships, and my youth leaders at the time, they were married, and um, I started to counsel for the first time, reaching out for some counseling myself
Hmm.
for what had happened. And more than anything, I think I just needed somebody to know that I was in so much pain.
Yeah.
And I actually started to trust one of the leaders at my church and started to open up a little bit, which has always been really hard for me. And a couple months after I started that, actually caught him sleeping with one of the young girls in our youth group. And I just am not somebody that can hold that kind of sin. I can't. I'm not. I grew up in a home where honoring your family well was keeping their secrets, and I'm just not wired that way. And
Yeah.
so I actually told, and the whole church turned on me. I was the broken drama queen. Um, I had a lot of accusations, lost a lot of friends. I ended up getting sexually assaulted by someone else in my youth group that was a really close friend, actually. And this whole assignment, which is crazy now that I'm so involved with the church, I can see why the enemy tried so hard to just have me lose my faith in leaders
Yeah.
in the church. And
And this is
so,
during high school still. You're still.
yeah, no, I actually started my senior year having my own apartment, going to church. But after the first month of school, I quit because the the guy that had sexually assaulted me was actually in a couple of my classes, and I didn't want to get him in trouble. Even though, I mean, he did get arrested. He did get in trouble, and he did admit what he had done. But when the school year started, I didn't want to be an inconvenient. I didn't want
Oh,
to cause a ripple, and so instead of real, and they wouldn't move me, they wouldn't trade my classes, and so instead of
that's just ridiculous,
exposing,
right?
yeah, instead of exposing why, I just quit. And I quit church, I quit school. I just started working, realized I really liked making money. And then that New Year's, I was 18. So I met my husband at 18, got married at 19, just a couple months later. We were married 6 months later.
Wow.
So yeah, met Mike at 18, got married at 19, had Anthony at 20 and Dominic at 21. And I really just tried to shut off everything that had happened and build a new life. And I poured myself into being a mom and a wife. And man, I look back now, I was just a baby.
Yeah.
And I made, my kids grew up with worship in the house. Back then it was all Michael W. Smith and Shout to the Lord, Darlene, and all those things.
Right. I
And
remember those.
Ron Canoli gospel going all the time.
Right.
And I made a really good run at being a good mom and a good wife. And then about the time that I turned 28, the traumas, some of the hardcore traumas it was like my mind started to go through memories of what happened and I couldn't shut it down anymore.
Mm.
And I had become, and I started to suspect my husband for infidelity, um, which later came out true. And women's intuition. So
Yeah.
I was making myself crazy. I already had all these horrific memories popping up, and now I'm like checking phones and call logs and driving by his work and becoming that crazy psycho chick trying to catch him in the act, making
Right.
myself absolutely crazy. And and I had surgery. I passed a kidney stone and then I had to have surgery, and I was really naive to medications. I had no knowledge. I mean, I'm sure I was sent home with something after the births of my kids or something, but um I don't, I think in my mind looking back, I think I thought that like pain medicine was basically like a Tylenol that made you tired or something. I really didn't have a knowledge. I'd never experienced like a euphoria or a high,
Yeah.
just groggy, tired. And I happened to one day in the middle of all this crazy where now my parents have moved to the same town from Washington to Oregon. I'm suspecting my husband for cheating. All these memories are popping up. I'm literally snapping at my kids. I'm a bucket of anxiety all the time. And this particular day, I went to the bank to deposit a check. And of course, I didn't recognize it at the time, but through inner healing, like it was so clear what happened. I came home and I knew I had to take my Percocet, and I took it. And then after I took it, I remembered I had taken it before I left to go to the bank. So I took 2 doses, and all of a sudden I had this, no, honey, that's not okay behavior. And I now know it was a euphoria, and
Yeah.
all of life was good. And I had all this patience and understanding for my husband, and I was sweet and I was soft and gentle. And I remember making the cognitive or whatever conscious a realization that it was the medication that made me that way. And I now, looking back, totally remember saying, I'm a better person on this medicine.
Wow.
And the second I partnered with that lie, I went full blown, like the next 10 years gone. The first couple years, I was a functioning addict. But within a couple years, I'm dragging my kids to ERs in the middle of the night, faking and lying for pain. I'm stealing money. I'm like, all like it became my god. I had an aunt that lived behind me that had bottles and bottles and bottles and bottles and bottles because she would get prescribed huge amounts every month and never take them. So I had
Mm.
an ongoing supply for a very long time. And but then it's just like your mind isn't itself, and you start to justify. And sometimes it still makes me cringe just to think the things that I would allow, like just the deceit and the lying and manipulation that I was
Yeah.
operating in. And then I really think that I hit rock bottom probably 3 years before I actually gave in. But I literally got to that place of being comfortable in my depravity.
Mm.
Because as long as I mean, I'm on the streets, I'm like literally, meeting people in dark alleys to buy pills, and no hygiene. Had to get my hair cut because it was matted from not being washed for months, and but so I'm to the point where I'm not even getting high anymore. I'm just trying to avoid withdrawal. And so literally going and calling all these different dentists. It was before everybody, this was back before everybody paid attention. And,
Right.
I would like hustle to get however much money to go get a tooth pulled so that I could get the pain pills. So, still like one of my biggest dreams is to get my teeth fixed, because I'm missing more than half of my teeth because of getting them pulled for drugs. And,
Wow.
but then one day, it was just this constant demise for years and years and years and years. And then one day, I look back, it was so supernatural. I don't even know what happened, but one day, it's not like my husband and I were fighting. We've been married 20 plus years. He basically watched me drown in addiction for 10. And I kissed him and went to go to Costco to fill a prescription. And I don't know what happened. I just walked away from my whole life and never went back. And abandoned. Well, I didn't even really own anything at that point. I'd lost homes and cars, and all of our things in storage was gone. And I went down a pretty dark road for about 10 days. And the Lord and I often go back and talk about this, but there was this time when, literally, I think the last 10 days before my suicide attempt, I remember laying there on this mattress, literally wholeheartedly believing that every breath that I took was taking away from someone else more deserving.
Mm.
I didn't have an ID. I didn't have a birth certificate. I couldn't get a job if I wanted to. Um, I had been in the psych ward at this point 19 times. Sometimes withdrawal would be so bad I would go out of my mind.
Wow.
Um, I'd been on enough psych meds I was on 11 different medications of psychiatric medications for almost 11 years, or for 15 years, but 11 medications.
Wow.
And this had all been going on simultaneously. Basically, it was a pill to function, a pill to wake up, a pill to go to sleep, a pill to stay mellow, to not be, I was diagnosed bipolar, schizophrenic. I was diagnosed PTSD, manic, all the things, all that's still in my medical records, years and years and years of psychiatric. And, but I, they pumped 87 Oxycontin out of my stomach trying to take my life. And in the middle of the night, the most beautiful nurse walked in my room, and she said, I am not supposed to do this, and I could lose my job. But God's been telling me for 2 hours to come in and tell you that He loves you. And if you look up, He's going to pull you out of this. And I looked her right in the eyes and I said, F God. But I didn't say F, I said the other word.
Right.
And because that's how angry I was.
Yeah.
And but even though that's the words that came out of my mouth, I literally felt something break inside of me. And I just started weeping, absolutely weeping. And it was like my mouth opened up and my life fell out. And this person that I never met in my life, I just started dumping everything. It was like I went in reverse from childhood to current, just dumping and dumping and dumping. And I look back now in the spirit and I could just see all of this black sludge just coming out, coming out, coming out. And she, oh my gosh, she was amazing. But anyway, she ended up saying, "Where's your husband now?" And I remember at the time we were in Oregon and my husband was in Washington. And I didn't even say what city, or I didn't even say Washington. I didn't say where, anything. I just said at his cousin's house on the corner of Evergreen and Grand. And she knew who I was talking about.
That is
And then
crazy.
I know it was so unbelievable. She goes, at Wally's? And I'm like, and I froze because I didn't want him to know where I was. I was trying to hide. I didn't want him to know I was in the hospital again. And so I literally kicked her out. I got angry and I kicked her out of my room.
So at this point, though, when you got out, where did you go? Would you go back to? I think I remember hearing. Let me ask. I think you went back to your parents, right?
Everybody under the sun was done with me. My children, my everybody was done. I'd burnt every bridge, and I ended up having to go back to my parents' house. And at that point, my parents were heavily drinking, and which they had never really done that my whole life. And
Mm,
I basically joined with them to avoid detox because I didn't want them to know that I was still an addict.
right.
And I ended up in a drunken stupor, breaking furniture and glass and just all this crazy. And I remember my mom, so horrific. It just blows my mind. Literally, they wanted so much to not make me feel guilty for what I'd done because they were drowning in their own guilt and shame.
Hmm.
And I just remember my mom steam cleaning my vomit, cracking a joke, singing a song from when I was a kid, going, "Whistle while you work." Like, let's just get in and clean it up. It's good. You know,
Yeah.
let's not face the fact that you just totally were in a drunken stupor and ruined my house, you know?
Right.
And I just remember thinking this is the most pathetic moment of my entire existence. And I sat down, gonna read a Twilight book, and I sat down and I said, I'm gonna die old and alone and an addict. There's no hope for me. I'm unfixable. And when I opened up that book, that woman's business card, which I did not take, and that book was not with me in Oregon.
So the nurse,
And
just to clarify, the
yeah,
nurse that had taken a
yeah,
chance to follow God left you her card, and
yep,
you didn't have the book and you didn't take the card, and they both show
right,
up.
yeah.
It
And
shows
I
up in your
opened up
book.
that book, and her business card is my bookmark. And I knew it was God, and I bursted into tears, and I said, "Okay, God, I'm done." And I called her bawling. She had me on a plane, which is funny because I know her. This is not somebody. One, she never answers her phone. The fact that she answered her phone was crazy. Two, this is not somebody that would just welcome some random person she met in the psych ward into her home. Like, this was so God led. It's insane.
Yeah.
And
Because
she
that's the
had
first
me.
thing I think of, like, oh, I'm going to let some psych ward person live with me. Yeah.
Yeah, that I just watched get all these Oxycontin pumped out of their stomach because they tried to commit suicide. Like,
Right.
it's not the norm. And so, and she's a pastor herself, which is so crazy. It was such a God ordained thing.
Wow.
And she had me on a train back to Oregon and welcomed me into her home. And I remember thinking for 5 days, every morning I'd be like, Lord, I need to tell her, I need to tell Pastor Rachel that I'm an addict. And then that at nighttime, I'd be like, Lord, I didn't tell her, I need to tell her. And I would feel guilty for not telling her. And then I would, each day was the same thing.
Yeah.
And then finally, I was like, Pastor Rachel, I have to tell you something. And she's like, okay, well, I think there's two things that I won't happen or that won't ever happen. One, if you're in love with me, and or if you want to cause family to my or hurt to my family or something like that. Like, she was just cracking a joke. And I said, I'm an addict. And she goes, duh, I was your nurse. Like, the thought that she knew that, like,
Yeah.
it just blew my mind that she knew that and had me in her home. And
And
so,
loved you
anyways,
anyway. Like,
and loved me anyway.
knew the worst of you and loved you anyway.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
beautiful.
And so I literally, it was the most supernatural chain of events, but I landed, I got out of detox. I landed in recovery back in Longview, Washington, which is where my mom hid out to have me.
Oh my goodness. Look at God bringing everything full circle.
Right. And then I find out that that Longview is actually called the City of Refuge. Isn't that
Oh my
crazy?
gosh. So your mom
Right.
goes there for refuge to birth you, and now
Mm-hmm.
you're going there to get restored.
Uh-huh. And now I take ministry students on trips, ministry trips up there all the time. It's so funny.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Um, But yeah, so I landed in recovery for a year. I literally was on a mountaintop for a year where no phone, no computers, no, the only book you had was a Bible and a notebook. And
Yet you did sneak something in. I think this is kind of
I
funny.
did. I did. I did. I totally was so I had no problem letting go of the drugs. I was so afraid to go off my psych meds, and you couldn't be on your psych meds there. And I smuggled a 4 month supply of 11 different medications in my bra. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how I got that all in there, but I did. And but I really think that that next morning, it was like 5 a.m. It was still dark, and I remember sitting on the edge of the metal bed, and I'm holding all of these bottles of medication. And I actually felt conviction, not condemnation or guilt, but conviction. And I remember thinking, Lord, I mean, because you got to realize, to me, I'd been on these meds for 15 years. And so for me to go off of them
Yeah.
was insane. Like, I would go so manic, I would have meltdowns, I would like confusion and chaos, like all these things. And also I was on medications that you are not supposed to just stop. And I just really want to say to anybody listening to this, don't just stop taking medication. There, this, just because this was my moment and what the Lord used, I'm not recommending people, because what I came off of, you should never do that. Like, the withdrawal off of those things is crazy, but this was really a truly a divine moment. But I sat there looking at those medications, and I said, okay, God, I'm done picking and choosing what parts of me you can have. It's all or nothing. I have to trust you even in this. And I went over to the main house, and I told them, that I had, smuggled these in, and I dumped them down the garbage disposal. And when they read the labels, they're like, you cannot just stop this. I'm like, no, I'm done. They're like, we need to get you to the hospital. I'm like, nope, I'm done.
Hmm.
And they really wanted to take me in, and I was like, nope. And I really trusted that God was going to, something just supernatural came over me, and I just was bound and determined I was going to trust him with everything, even the parts that scared me the most. And I really believe that that was my moment of surrender. I never had one withdrawal, not one.
Wow. Praise God.
Not one. The
It's
only thing that
amazing.
happened was it took probably about a week or two to get my natural emotions back. I think I was
Hmm.
kind of numb for a minute, but I never had a withdrawal.
And once you started feeling emotions, what is that like for someone who's numbed all their emotions for so long? What was that transition like?
Oh my, it was awful. Because now I'm not high, I'm not on psych meds. I'm actually having to feel the magnitude of all the choices I had made over the last decade.
Yeah.
All the people I stole from, having my kids living in a storage unit because I spent the money on drugs. My kid taking my son's Christmas present, getting a brand new Xbox and pawning it for drugs. Um, the lying and manipulation, all the people like that dealt with real pain that I would steal their pills, like just all these horrific things. And now the gravity of how horrific of a person I am is hitting me so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And and I really believe this next part that I'm going to share with this, I feel like it pertains to anybody in any aspect of life that's having a hard time letting go of or receiving forgiveness for things. Well, first, let me start with, first, I had what I now know to be like a natural deliverance. I think that so much Jesus came in that demons just flew. But I
Yeah.
had this moment that to me felt like all of a sudden, for the first time ever, being connected with rage. And I just was screaming. It was so dramified, because
Hmm.
I'm a firm believer that deliverance is as simple as just exchanging a lie for a truth. But sometimes, if you give the enemy the stage, they'll take it. And I just didn't know any better back then.
Right.
So it was so like exorcist moment. It was so crazy. But I remember after screaming and just all the stuff, it coming out for so long. Um, I remember being spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted. Absolutely exhausted. I like was labor just to breathe. And I remember falling out in complete exhaustion on my bed at the rehab center. And that's when I first really encountered Jesus. I felt him crawl in that bed with me and play with my hair. And I look back and I don't think I realized that my idea of Jesus back then was just someone that was there to gently remind me of all the things I needed to fix about myself and work on in order to be good enough. And
Hmm.
that's not the Jesus that showed up. The Jesus that showed up, he said, I am so sorry for the things that happened to you that made you not want to feel. And if you
Hmm.
trust me, I'm going to make every day of the rest of your life better than any day you've ever lived.
Hmm.
And that is exactly what he's done. And but even with that encounter, I couldn't let go of my guilt. In fact, I think his gentleness towards me made it worse. Now I felt
Yeah.
really, really bad because now it's like I know Jesus is amazing and loves me, and I've done all of these horrible things. And so the next 2 weeks go by, and I'm sitting there in a Bible study, and I'd never had an open vision before. And my eyes were open, and I was aware of what was going on in the room, but I literally was in a swimming pool. All of a sudden, I was in a swimming pool full of butts, like booties, like butts were floating to the top of this water. And I remember thinking, this is so demonic. What is happening? And I look up and I see Jesus standing on the side, and he literally kind of gave me one of those gangster nods. And he's like, you like that? And I'm like, this is so awkward. What is happening? But I felt his spirit shift in such tenderness towards me. It was so tender. And he said, Jenna, every day I stand here excited to take your guilt and your shame, ready for you to receive my forgiveness, ready to show you that nothing that has ever happened from this point on matters anymore. But every day you come at me with, yeah, but I did this. Yeah, but I pawned my kid's Xbox. Yeah, but I had my kids living in a storage unit. Yeah, but I stole so and so's medication. Yeah, but. And he's like, Jenna, you've created yourself quite the pool of butts. And I just remember laughing, going, oh my gosh, Jesus is actually really clever. That's really good. Because
Yeah.
he'll often talk to us in ways that we're willing to listen, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And he goes, once and for all, when you get out of this pool, that's it. It's done. Anything and everything that has ever happened in your life up until this moment no longer defines you. You get to get out and walk on new pages that have never been written on. And, I sat there for probably 20 more minutes. I couldn't get out of it. I had become
Hmm.
comfortable in my butts. As
Yeah.
long as I was in my butts, then it was going to be my radar on what not to do, and it was going to keep me safe, and nobody was going to believe in me. Therefore, nobody was going to let me down. Or I wasn't going to let anybody else down.
Yeah.
And then Jesus literally looks at me and he says, actually, Jenna, you're actually ready to receive my forgiveness. And you actually know the power of my forgiveness. But you're afraid that if the people you hurt don't see you suffering, that they won't believe you're sorry.
I think that's a
And
real thing. I
it
think
is a
I
real
th-
thing.
I think people also, when they're mad at you, want you to suffer.
Yep.
Somehow it translates to humility or
Yep.
groveling or
Mm-hmm.
being put in your place.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when he said that, he's like, you are trying to prove to everyone that you're sorry. And he's like, I'm asking you to put your face to mine and chase me in complete abandon, and I will turn the hearts of men. At that time, there wasn't a family member that would talk to me. And
Wow.
you know that over the years, every single one of those people has been restored to me. Me and my children have the most amazing relationship. And all of them are saved now. Every single one of my siblings, my parents, my kids, everybody's saved.
Wow.
And it's not from me going back and fixing anything. It was
Yeah.
because they all watched my journey, even if it started on social media, just watching on my journey, or hearing things. But I never actually went back and tried to fix it myself. Now, of course, did I ask forgiveness for things I'd done? Yes, many times long before. But it wasn't until the fruit in my life was exploding because I just kept my face planted to Jesus. And the fruit actually spoke for itself. And one by one, They actually, more than anything, came back and said, "I'm so sorry that I was so angry at you. I wasn't,
Aw,
like they've all looked so different, but the Lord
right.
restored every single one of them, and that's something that I never believed was possible."
Yeah, that's so beautiful. You've gone through so many things, so much rejection and abandonment, and with everything you mentioned, the rape, molestation, the being, church hurt. I mean, I can't imagine like somebody that suffers with one of those things could turn away from the Lord. Nevertheless, all of these things. But I also know that whatever we've been freed from, we're free to help others. And so you gain a lot of wisdom in your journey and in your process. And I know a bit more of your story, but I would love for the listeners to really know what you believe like what role does spiritual warfare play in the cycle of all these things happening?
Yes. So, one of the biggest things that I've learned, because now, that's all been 8 years ago. The thing
Hmm.
is while I was in recovery, my spiritual gifts exploded, and I'm actually a naked eye seer, which I didn't know there was a name for that, whatever. A lot of people
Hmm.
see the spirit, but I actually see with the naked eye. So, like, demons, spirits, angels, giftings, anointings, callings, like, I actually see those with my eyeballs, and
Hmm.
they're real for me. And so, a lot of people are like, "How are you not afraid?" I'm like, I think I just have always, since I encountered Jesus, I've just always been able to filter everything through the goodness of God. And I've always just known the power and authority that God always says that we have. But so often we all want to be convinced of that. What if we actually just believed the authority that we have,
Yeah.
And which is easy to say now, but there was quite a journey in there.
Right.
Um, but the thing is that God's a funny guy, because literally having my gifts and being a naked eye seer erupt in a house where I'm living with 30 chicks coming out of drugs and prostitution. That's like boot camp for a prophet, big
Oh
time.
my gosh, I
Like,
can't even.
that's just crazy.
Yeah, like you're seeing it
It's,
all.
yeah. And so nobody really knew how to help me. But then all of a sudden, like, I pray for people, demons leave. I pray for people, people get healed. I have conversations with people, they get revelation and their hearts get healed. And so there's a big part of me that actually, I think the reason why cycles came around of addiction for so long was that um I kind of got robbed of the actual program, because I literally now, I pretty much was in ministry while I was trying to get recovery. And so, not knowing any better, my gifts kind of, I went from being my identity being a hardcore addict, a homeless addict, to my gifts being my identity, right? Well, God can always show up. Our gifts are irrevocable, right? God's always going to make me look amazing, right?
Yeah.
What I didn't know was I was a daughter, right?
Right.
I had not, even though I operated in these crazy spiritual gifts that brought crazy freedom, the day God said to me, "I care so much more about your heart than what you can do for the kingdom," like, that
Yeah.
blew my mind. That broke every single religious mindset I ever had, because I thought that was the whole point. Like, self-sacrifice, do all, kill yourself in ministry 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to, because if you can see it and you can help it, then you need to do it, because who are you to hide your gifts from anyone, type of a thing. And
Right.
so that kind of blew my mind. Well, there was these amazing workshops, these inner healing workshops that were going on in Oregon after I got out of recovery, and I actually went and lived there and was a part of those, and I had no idea how much God was really exposing me to, people that loved in messes, right? Instead of
Yeah.
guilting. Because the recovery place I went through was absolutely amazing and definitely what I needed for the time. But looking back, I'm realizing there was a lot of guilting and shaming into obedience, type of a thing.
Right.
Very religious, which it's changed so much since then. But back then, that's what it was. And then I go the extreme opposite. But I still, everybody called me the demon slayer, the dragon slayer. I had this huge identity of, the crazy powerhouse prophet that walks in and wrecks everybody and sets everybody free. But of course, I went from being this worthless, homeless, lying, conniving person to now everybody wants 5 minutes with me. Of course, I fell into that. Of
Right.
course, I have a worth and a value, right? I pray for people, stuff happens. Now I have a worth and a value, because the fact is my gifts did explode, and I did know like my ability and my time alone with the Lord has always been constant. That was never lacking. I've always come from intimacy. But as far as people goes, like I had no idea how to receive love from people, or also I didn't know how to receive love from God. And or it was easy to receive love from God when I was doing crazy ministry, because then I had something to put it under.
Yeah,
But the
you
idea that God would love me without me doing those things is where I did not have that revelation yet.
and I think
And
that's such an important thing because if
yeah,
people only get affirmation for their gifts and not for just being, like you said, a daughter for who they are, but only for the gifts, then we will
right.
keep performing in order to get love instead of
Yes,
realizing we already have love. And I think that's where people in ministry that didn't identify it like you did can go down a dark path. And I think that's why we have so much church hurt. Because when people aren't
yeah,
getting the affirmation for their gifts that they feel like they should, or they're manipulating people with their gifts, then it's
exactly.
not spirit led anymore. It's flesh led.
Exactly. Yeah. And see, I really do believe that my ministry was definitely love based and through intimacy, but I definitely I should say performance almost, because it was all
Right.
real. It's just that I didn't know that God would still love me if I wasn't in that place. So I didn't
Yeah.
have boundaries. I didn't know when to say no. I didn't know to take days off and rest and take care of my heart. Like I
Yeah.
think there was this fear that if I stopped, I was going to lose that level of intimacy I had with the Lord.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's a good, I keep saying it's so important, but for all of us in ministry, it's definitely, I remember I've said this on a previous podcast, but the Lord once told me, He said, Jill, everything good you do is going to come from a place of rest.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so when I'm out of rest, I'm almost thankful that I
Yeah.
feel uncomfortable because it's like he's telling me like let's get back, you and I, stop doing so much
Right.
ministry, because honestly he doesn't need us, you know.
Right.
He chooses to
Right.
do stuff through us. But yeah. Anyway,
Right.
continue with
Yeah.
your thought.
Yeah, so I just the Lord called me to Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry in the craziest way. I I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know who Bill Johnson was, Chris Vallotton was. I didn't know who any of these people were. Um, but my friend Holly had said, "Hey, do you want to go to the church that Jesus Culture came from?" And I didn't even know that all the songs we sing at church were Jesus Culture. I was so naive. Um, but I asked her, I said, "Well, where is it?" And she says in California. And I literally, my response was, "I want to get a tan." So we go, and what's funny is we get there, and the first day I meet one of the leaders there, one of the pastors there. I didn't know really who he was or what he was about, which is actually now one of my best friends who I just spent a year living with him and his wife. And it's just funny how God played that all out, because he was the first person I met there. That was Seth Dahl. And but it but we go there, and just for the weekend we check out the healing rooms and whatnot. We got rocked. It was great. I actually approached Seth and talked to him because Holly said he's part of the children's ministry, and she was in children's ministry at the time. And so I went to ask him a couple of questions because she was too chicken. And so we laugh now to this day on how we met. But, anyways, we go home after that weekend. And now, mind you, I'm buried in full time ministry, like in three different ministries at the time, killing myself in ministry, don't know it. And Holly calls me and she goes, "I had a vision of us with all of our stuff crammed in my Jeep going to Bethel School." And I go, "Bethel has a school?" And she goes, "Yeah, School of Supernatural Ministry." And this click happened, because here I am, totally a freak in my world. Like, I don't know. I hadn't met anyone like me. I don't know anybody like me. I don't know anybody that sees like me. Like, I'm I'm the freak of nature around that has
Yeah.
no connection or grid, right?
Right.
And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to school with a whole bunch of me's. Oh my word. So to me, the idea of going there was more like, oh my word, I'm going to connect with a whole bunch of people just like me. And over time, learned that I was a freak even at Bethel. But the thing is I go there with this crazy huge gifting and identity and anointing. And I remember my first year revival pastor, when she met me a couple days before school started, she says, "Oh, I got your number." And I'd never really had anybody read me the way I read others.
Hmm.
And she goes, "Jenna, you are like the Twin Towers. That first tower is your gifting and your anointing. It's huge, it's massive, it's fully founded on God." She goes, "But that second is your identity, and it's like you've been building the foundation for a garage." And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What the heck does that mean? I'm like, but I could feel it pierce my soul. Like, I could tell God was telling me something, but I didn't know what. And I remember driving away from there going, "Lord, I have no idea what that means, but I say yes," right?
Yeah.
Well, I learned very quickly as the first week of school, the Lord wanted me to lay down my gifting.
Mm.
Because the fact is I had gifting. I still have gifting and anointing. What I didn't know was that I was a daughter. I didn't know how to just be loved without doing something for it. I didn't know um I didn't know how to not earn heaven through ministry. And also I didn't know how to know the things that I know in the spirit and not want to change them. I think so many people pray and desire to have giftings like that. But when you have giftings like that, I think one of the hardest things is learning how to know the things you know and not do it. Because when the Lord always has a plan, and when you think just because you see it and you know about it, you're the one to bring freedom, that's not always the case. And
Yeah.
it takes that intimacy with the Lord and sitting with Him and knowing His truth and being connected to His heart to know the ebb and flow. Because the only way that you can fully be used by the Lord is when you are ebbing and flowing with Him. Your gifts can reveal a lot of things to you, but that relationship with God is what's going to tell you when to move and when not to.
Right. Because I've learned too that sometimes the Lord will show you things that are wrong with people because He trusts you and He just
Yeah,
wants you to pray for them because
right.
He's working in their life and He wants them to have help and, connecting with Him. But sometimes people don't receive it when it comes from us. They will receive it
Yeah,
best always when they receive it from the Lord, I think. But it's trial and error. I know I made some mistakes of that in the beginning, too. And of course, we never do it perfectly, but having the wisdom and being intimate with the Lord to know when to
right.
speak and when
Yep.
to hold back. It's glad you said that.
One of the things that I definitely want to really express through this is, yes, I have come from trauma, and what I have done to step into the Lord's truth is spend time with Him. And I spend hours with Him every single day, and I ask Him multiple times a day, "Jesus, what is your truth? What is your truth? What's your truth about me?" And I didn't know how to do that. And one of the things that changed my life, and I feel like as I counsel people who question whether they hear God or not, or they do hear things and they don't know if it's God or not, or if it's just their thoughts, this is what the Lord did with me. I I didn't, my revival pastor, when I could see now, she obviously saw clearly that I only was living in ministry, but not, stepping into who I was as a daughter. And so she's like, "I want you to go home. I don't want you to pray. I don't want you to worship. I want you to receive from the Lord." And I'm like, "Okay, no problem," right? And so I go home and I remember laying there, crickets, total crickets. Next night I try again, and I was so frustrated. I was like, or no, not the, it was that same night after like 20, 30 minutes. I was so frustrated from the crickets that I was like, "I'm just going to worship a little bit, just a little bit." And I laugh at myself so much now because of all songs. What did I sing? What can I do for you? What can I bring to you? What kind of song do you want me to sing?
Yeah.
By Jen Johnson. And not knowing the second half of that song is him responding, saying, "I don't need you to do a thing,"
Right, right.
and and I remember one of my best friends, Holly, going, "You're not receiving," because she's in the other room doing dishes, knowing what I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm like, "Shut up, you're dumb.
I'm
I'm
trying.
trying to do this. I'm so mad. I'm throwing a fit like a toddler." And I go to school the next day to my revival pastor, and I'm like, "This receiving thing sucks. I don't get it." All I knew how to do was to pour out, pour
Yeah.
out, pour out, pour out, pour out, pour out. And she goes, well, it's because you believe that you need to worship and get in the presence, ask forgiveness for all of your sins, and remove anything hindering you from feeling God so that you can receive. And I went, yeah. She goes, nope. And I'm like, that's all I've ever known. Enter his gates with thanksgiving in your heart, and um, keep your slate clean. And she goes, no, Jenna. She goes, that's professional intimacy. She's like, your mind cannot comprehend you receiving from God without you doing something first to make it happen. You aligning yourself right, removing all sin, doing all of these things. And I could feel that I was close to having a breakthrough, like understanding, but I wasn't quite there yet. The click wasn't complete yet. And then she got me with my own kids. She goes, how old are your boys right now? And at the time, they were like 18 and 19, I think. And she goes, and she knew my oldest was struggling with some drugs himself, trying to come out of numbing his own pain and making some dumb decisions. And she goes, when you see your boys, do you love them? I'm like, yes, those are my babies. She goes, when you see them, do you just run and wrap your arms around them? I'm like, yes. I'm like, oh my word. She goes, you mean you don't make them stop in front of you and go, okay, mom, this is every single thing I've done wrong since we talked last. And you're the best mom ever, the most beautiful mom ever. And I worship the ground you walk on, mom. And then once they've worshiped you enough and told you all their sins, then you'll release your love on them. And I went, oh my gosh, that is so how I saw God. And then the Lord later that night, I went home and the Lord really continued to talk to me about when my boys are making dumb decisions, my ability, because they're my children and I know them, to know that it's coming from a place of hurt, that they're hurting, that they're trying to numb pain, that they're trying to act out, and it makes me want to love them more. It makes me want to love them in those areas that are hurting so deeply, and bring wisdom to them on that. And the Lord's like, that's how I am with you. When you're making dumb decisions that you want to beat yourself up, don't separate yourself from me. Let me love you in those places that are so dark, because then you will get empowered out of it with my love, instead of pulling yourself away from me because of what you've done. And that blew my mind. So then that night I go home and I'm trying the receive thing. And I was like, how do I connect with the Lord and not pray or worship first or do something to make it happen?
And
And
do
I
all the things that you
realized,
think are supposed to happen
totally,
first. Yeah.
yeah, how do I just, and I remember I just asked one question. And now I probably ask the Lord this question 50 million times a day, every day, and have ever since. I just said, Jesus, what's your truth about me? And this, you're my daughter.
Mhm.
You're so beautiful. I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited to tell you how I feel about you. This flood came and I was like, whoa, okay. And so then the next night I did it again. Jesus, what's your truth about me? Oh my gosh, I'm so excited you asked again. I love you. I cherish you. You're so powerful. All these things. I'm like,
Right.
whoa. The third night I did it again. And I was like, okay, that's just my thoughts. I'm just thinking up good stuff and saying it's God. Okay, I'm just
Right.
thinking what are good things that I can think of, and I'm saying it's God. And what he said to me next was so profound. There's no way that I'm clever enough to come up with that. He says, Jenna, there is not one thought amazing that you can have about yourself that I don't have a million more. So think away. Because if it's good and it's beautiful, then I'm partnered with it.
It's good.
What? I was like,
It's
oh my
that God has
word.
as many thoughts about us as sand on the seashore, right? And stars
Absolutely.
in the sky. And that question, I love that. I have that in my book, and when I coach people, I say, ask God, what does he love about you? Like, you
Yeah.
could ask him every day and he would still have a new thing to say to you.
Right.
So for all those people that are wondering, how do I start to hear God? What a great
Right.
question, just to start with
Yeah.
that and just build
Yeah.
what you're talking about, relationship. Because
Absolutely.
we already know how to do repentance. We know how to do
Yeah.
praise and thankfulness.
We know how to tell him everything we've done wrong.
Right. But how do we ask him questions? Well, people who've been listening to my podcast for a while know that that is the core of freedom coaching, is asking God questions and
Yeah.
receiving from him. Because once we encounter his love, and in the ways that you've explained, that's what sets you free. Because once you
Right.
believe who God really says you are, then you're
Hmm.
like, I believe I can go do this thing. I can.
Right.
And the doing comes out of being, not vice versa.
Right. Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I just started going after that. And so then I went through this season of I call it choosing God's truth, even though it opposed my own, because I feel like he would say all these beautiful things about me, but most of them is not how I felt. And so I started saying to him, okay, God, clearly you keep saying I'm beautiful, but how do I get my internal belief systems, how I feel about myself when I look in the mirror, my natural reactions? How do I get everything internally inside of me to line up with what you're saying when it's not how I feel? And so I started going after that. And I had this thing where, the Lord asked me to go look in the mirror. And I remember I couldn't even do it seriously at first. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're so beautiful. You're gorgeous. You're breathtaking. Like I did it so sarcastically at first. And then I remember one day the Lord goes, you think beauty is what the world has taught you a man would be sexually attracted to. The idea that that wasn't the only option blew my mind. I was like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
isn't that it? We're supposed to be hot and gorgeous so some guy will want us and then we're not
Yeah.
alone and we have worth and value. And I didn't even realize that I believed that. And it was through that I started to realize, even if it's something we believe, even if it's something we've experienced, even if it's something that's been spoken over us, even if it's what our emotions are telling us, if something's not lined up with the character of God and what he's saying, then it's a lie.
Yeah.
So I started breaking off lies of things that I actually fully believed and felt,
It's
because
good.
I realized what I was doing was I was forcing my soul to come into alignment with what my spirit knew was right. Our soul is where our hurts and our lies and our traumas and our identity, wants to self protect, is all in our soul. And it always wants to self protect. Always. It always wants to avoid pain. But our spirit is communing with Jesus all the time. And so when I started to realize that I could force my soul to come into alignment with my spirit, I went after everything. And it just became a way of life. Now, the whole time this is going on, I think everybody around me knows all this. I feel like I'm trying to learn what I feel like everybody around me already knows. Little did I know that the Lord was teaching me tools and that He's had a platform for me all along to be able to, now it just blows my mind. He sits me down in front of world leaders and powerful people in ministry, and then now Hollywood and celebrities and government. And all of these things that I've learned just from my own journey to turn around and teach these tools so that people, no matter what platform they're on, even if it's Hollywood, if it's the rap industry, if it's government, I don't care if you're the president, when people are walking in the fullness of who they are and where God has placed them without lies lined up with His truth, that's everything. I just never dreamed in a million years that I would become the epitome of the scripture, He will take the least of the least to confound the wise.
Yeah. What I love
And
about what you said is that when we truly walk in who God has originally created us to be, He will put us into places that we'll be able to help other people get to who they are supposed to be. But He
yeah,
never starts by saying, okay, go to school, take a class. It's always your own personal journey with Him,
yeah,
because whatever you have, you give away. So if
right,
you've got freedom in an area, I mean, we shouldn't really seek our own freedom just so we can help others, because that's kind of the wrong motivation. But if we just seek it for ourselves, God will use it eventually. And I
right,
think I've seen a lot of, even, I don't know why I'm going in this direction, but a lot of people in ministry even wanting to have the impact without doing the work beforehand. And
right.
what you're saying is you never went after being in the
No,
presence of these people. You went after your own healing, and then
yep.
those other doors started opening.
And being in the presence of God, the scripture. Well, I don't think, to me, it's been very natural. I come from a level of darkness and self hatred and self destruction that I hope, I just hope nobody ever lives in that place. And so for me, I can't do anything but seek Him first.
Yeah.
But what does He say? Seek ye first the kingdom of God,
Hmm.
right?
And then
As I
and
have
His
seeked
righteousness.
Him.
Yeah.
So I told the Lord about, maybe about 2 years ago, I would say. I remember I used to, oh, wait, hold on. Let me ask the Lord, how do I word this? Okay. Somewhere in this journey, okay, the Lord was showing me, because I would go through these cycles of just like this heaviness would take me out. And I kind of went into the season where the Lord kind of just plucked me away from my whole life, about 5 years ago. And I had about 4 months in the middle of nowhere in Colorado where the Lord really brought a lot of things into alignment. And once it all broke and came into alignment, He showed me from the moment I experienced Him, my spirit was soaring forward 500 miles a minute. And, often your gifts will open doors that your
Mm-hmm.
character's not ready for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kept getting these opportunities and these platforms that internally I just wasn't ready for. And so I would carry this weight and this heaviness. And then through this time in Colorado, that all came into alignment. And I made a covenant with the Lord. I was like, Lord, I will speak on any platform that you give me. I just want my soul to be in alignment with my spirit. I want to all enter the platform together, right?
Yeah.
And it was just this thing with me and the Lord. And so I feel like every platform has been that way. But my focus, I've never asked for a platform. I've never asked for, I mean, we all ask for, favor and acceleration. We all ask for the things that God gives us permission to ask for, right? But I've never gone searching that out. What I did was I went more into the place of, Lord, are you sure? Am I ready? I don't want to buckle. I don't want to get
Right.
up there and buckle. Okay, Lord, what is it that you're doing in me internally that I'm going to be able to step on this in complete confidence and not buckle? And so I kept going after that, going after that. Well, then it got to the point where I felt like the Lord was, would you please stop arguing with me about your platforms? And I was like, I realized, and I said, okay, Lord, clearly you have a platform for me. Clearly you have a plan for my life. Clearly you plan on doing huge things for me. And I'm going to stop arguing with that. All I ask is that we stay in a place where internally I'm always lined up with that. And so I feel like my time with Him, He's my best friend.
Yeah.
We talk all day. And I can honestly say I've been in a habitational relationship with Him for years, not a visitational. Anybody can go to church on Sunday and get God bumps and get wrecked by the Holy Spirit. But what is it like to walk that level of two-way conversation and relationship all day, every day, all the time, whether you're looking for your dustpan or you're getting ready to sit in front of one of the most iconic people in Hollywood? It doesn't matter. I want to do it with Him.
Yeah.
And as long as that stays my focus and seeking His face is my focus, don't get me wrong. I told Him, I said, Lord, all this, I have people tell me all the time, Jenna, I've never seen anybody with more favor on their life. Okay, I get it. You can't explain favor. I don't have an explanation or a defense mechanism for it, right? But what I told the Lord was, I was like, Lord, I want all these epic things that happen in my life and all this craziness that you are always unfolding and all these amazing trips I get to go on and all these beautiful things I get to do with Him. I always want them to be a fruit in my life instead of a reason. The
Mm.
minute that those things become the goal and my focus or to gain those things, then that's when I need to take a break and take a realignment, because to me, way more than shark diving in Bora Bora and way more than the Oscars, as amazing as that was last night, I don't want to do it without Him.
Yeah.
I don't ever want that to be the focus. But when you are someone that has come from the level of darkness that I've come from, being in that place and trusting what He says, I'm probably the most confident person that I know. But why? Because everything about me has been choosing to believe what He says about me, not how I feel.
It's good. Say
That's
that. Say that
scary.
again. Say that again. That's good.
I am the reason I am so confident is because everything about me has completely adopted what He says about me instead of how I feel. If I stayed feeling based on what the world has taught me and what my experiences have been, if that was my filter on how I felt about myself, I would be right back where I started.
Yep.
But my journey has been more how to step into the fullness of what God says about me and fully believe him, even if the world around me is saying otherwise. And I feel like I'm so rooted in that. I don't care. There isn't one soul on this planet that could come to me and say, "You're ugly, you're fat, you're this, you're that, you're not worth it." That would even shake me because I'm so rooted in his truth. And there was a time that I was taught that that was prideful and arrogant.
Yeah.
And I'm learning when God actually really started to talk to me about what pride was, because he said to me, "Jenna, you're so afraid of pride that you won't allow confidence."
Hmm.
And I realized I didn't realize that I had lies that if, because now, okay, so I'm going to be 47 in a couple weeks. I can honestly tell you, I've never been more aware of who I am, what I carry, where I'm going, how loved I am, able to connect with my heart, powerful in ministry, but more than anything, I'm a daughter. The fact that I can say all of those things growing up, and what my belief system was before was that those statements made me arrogant and self-absorbed. But the fact is every single one of those statements is God's truth about me. So when the Lord said to me, I actually did not a podcast, but I did a live Facebook thing once. Is your fear of pride keeping you prideful? Well, because so often we fear pride that we want to come under. We want to say that we're less
Right.
than. We want to act like we're less than. And the Lord's like, when you choose to stay bound to a belief system that isn't lined up with mine, that's your pride, because you're actually choosing your belief system over my own.
Right.
And I was like, oh, whoa. So that I'm going to come in that false humility, and I'm going to say I'm less than, and I'm not, oh, really, and not receive a compliment and not be proud of myself. I actually used to resent people that would give me compliments, because I felt like if somebody was giving me compliments, then I was drawing attention to myself. And the Lord really took the time to break down all of these belief systems. And he's like, all of these things that you have believed have been taught to you either by parents or by society or by school, but they were never what I said. And
Yeah.
so going back to the roots of how God meant for it to be, God never said, okay, don't think well of yourself. No, he said, love yourself as your neighbor.
Right. So if you know, there are people who struggle with believing what God says about them, and they don't even know how to get into it. And we've talked a little bit about, being in a culture of habitation and abiding in his presence and asking him questions. What other things would you say to people that are really trying to start to learn their identity in Christ so that they can, be who he wants them to be in the way that you've experienced?
One, put in the time. People don't want to put in the time. People can feel God flowing through them as they minister to others, but a lot of people don't want to take the time to sit still and let him love us. Sitting there and allowing, have you ever tried to love someone that doesn't want to receive love? It
Yeah.
sucks,
Yeah.
right? It totally sucks. Or someone that you genuinely value and love and think that they're amazing, and you can tell that they don't even like themselves at all, and all you want to do is tell them how much you love them and how amazing they are, and they just can't even hear it. That's how God feels with almost all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I mean, that's how he feels with us, because we don't want to. But the fact is, sitting under love is one of the hardest things to do for anyone, I think. And it's taking the time and finding out what works for you, and that you can't mess up.
Yeah.
You can't mess up. You can't mess up. And so I actually listen to Graham Cook all the time,
He's
which
so
is
good
funny.
about this subject.
Yeah, because for years I would put him in my headphones and I would listen, and I really, all of his stuff, I'm thinking brilliantly, and the beloved, all of those things um are, I really believe, what renewed my mind coming out of the addict mind. You don't just wake up free from that one day.
Right.
And really adopting a lot of that. And what's funny is, at the time, now I've been in a movie with him, which is hilarious. I would have never believed that in a million years that I would ever get to meet him and whatnot. And I met him at Modern Prophet last year. But I would listen to that all the time. And I remember this was mind blowing for me, and I really want people to pay attention to this, because we can look at powerful leaders and think, oh, they have something I don't. No, are you kidding me? I remember I had had multiple opportunities where I was going to listen to Graham, and something would always happen. And then I was finally at Modern Prophet last year at Angela's Temple, and I was going to be able to see him. And because I am a naked eye seer, I just remember I couldn't wait for him to walk out on stage. I wanted to see his angels. I wanted to see what was around him. Like this, I don't get starstruck, but I have always, he's been my hero because I've listened to him in my ears forever. And when he walked out on stage, God blew my mind, because I just knew that I was going to have this lightning has struck, I hit the ground, my whole life makes sense moment.
Mm-hmm.
And when Graham walked out, I just remember I kind of cocked my head to the side a little bit, and I was like, huh, he's just a man. And God, I hear God, because Graham has this thing in one of his teachings, I love him because, or I love you because I love you because I love you. And I
Yeah.
hear God go, I love him because I love him because I love him because I love him. And then what God said to me changed the trajectory of my thought process. God goes, Jenna, the only difference between Graham and a lot of my children is Graham fully believes that I love him. He goes, but so do you. First, of course, I fangirled and was like, oh my gosh, God just compared me to Graham Cook. But then my next thought was, oh my word, God's love. I mean, we hear this, but really think about it. The amount of God that or the amount of love that God has for us is never changing, ever. Even when we sin, even when we mess up, even when we're not perfect, even when we're running from Him, He always loves us. It's unchanging. But when we allow Him, what changes is our capacity to receive it.
Yes.
And so our biggest battle isn't to be sin free. Our biggest battle is to be able to fully receive love even when we have sin.
Yes.
And it takes time.
Yeah. It
It
takes
takes time.
history. It takes
It
history of
does.
doing it and knowing how he's going to respond
Yep.
and, creating that relationship because he feels the same about us, but it's us understanding his character so that we respond to him the same way.
Yeah.
So like what you said, we're fully in line with our soul and our spirit. I love that.
Yeah.
I've often said, I've got this phrase that God showed me that when love comes to you, it's cultivated in you and then it's communicated through you.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
that it all starts with receiving love from God. We often as
Yep.
Christians, hear about grow in intimacy with God and grow in your faith. But it's often about how do we love him more? How do I show him I love him
Right.
more? Instead of how do I learn how he really loves me
Yeah.
so that nothing shakes us.
Exactly. It's the same in marriages. Vulnerability and transparency creates intimacy, but it has to be given and received.
Yeah,
When you have a
that's good.
marriage and you have one person that's pouring out, but the other person can't receive that love, then there's a block and there's a disconnect. It's the same thing with God. God, of course, we love to pour out and we love to show Him, I love you, I worship you, I adore you, I give you everything. Like we do all of those things, but it's really hard for people to learn how to cultivate, Lord, what's your truth about me? And letting Him be like, I love you, and telling Him how He feels about you. And then a lot of people don't want to do that out of fear of disappointment. They have to fight the belief system. Well, if I make space for the Lord and I sit down and I'm like, Jesus, what's your truth about me? Is He going to show up? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll
Mm-hmm.
find their connection to God through what they pour out instead of sitting under it. And what I tell people all the time, I think this is so key. If that's how you feel, then say that. I believe that speaking your words out loud are so powerful. But often we have our inner monologues with God. I actually talk out loud to God all day, every day. But I really believe it's important to be like, God, I'm afraid if I sit down and make space for you, you're not going to show up. I'm so afraid that I'm going to ask you what's your truth about me and that you're not going to say anything. What if
Yeah.
I take an hour every day or 15 minutes every day to sit here and say, God, what are you saying? You know, and you don't show up. The other thing is that a lot of times when people come and do a session with me. And they're like, well, I just don't hear God like that. I'm like, okay, the first lie you need to break is, and I have them say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I break off and renounce the lie that I don't hear God like that.
Yeah.
Because even if that's been your experience, you fully believe that lie, which is keeping you bound to that. But you
Right.
break that lie and it opens that spiritual pathway and that connection with God wide open by breaking that lie and breaking the partnership that you believe that you don't hear him like that. Because the fact is everyone's capable of hearing him like that.
And the fact is, anyone who's a believer heard him to be called to, be a believer. Like
Yep,
we've all
absolutely.
heard him, we just don't recognize it
Yeah,
because sometimes people haven't, given us permission to do it differently. And I think, what does Graham Cook say? It's not. Don't let your history define your destiny. Like, it doesn't. They're not the same thing. They're different. Thank God.
yeah,
So, yeah, your experience is good for up to a certain point, but
right.
it only got you to where you're at. So if you want to go more, you have to ignore your experience and look at
Yep,
other people and have faith to believe there's more and ask him for more. But I
absolutely.
think so many people have been disappointed for prayers that they've prayed. And
Hmm.
I know the one prayer we can pray that is totally in line with God's heart. Well, there's many, but one of them is, God, I want more of you. Will you reveal yourself to me?
Yeah,
I want to hear you. I want to see you. I'm still asking him for certain things. I believe he wants me to know him more. Forget the gifts and seeing angels or whatever. Like, he wants me
right.
to know him more and receive his love. So he will always answer that prayer.
Absolutely.
We've chatted about so many things,
Yeah.
and it's been so good. So I'm going to leave in the show notes all the different ways that people can get in contact with you. But will you just say for the recording, what is your website address again?
It's www.heartscaping.co.
Great. Awesome. Oh my gosh, girlfriend, this was such a great conversation. I mostly listened, so it was
Yeah.
a great listening time for me to hear
Yeah.
of your heart for the Lord and all the things he has done in your life. Thank you for sharing
Oh,
your story.
it's wonderful. He's amazing. I'm very, very thankful.
Yes, we're
Oh, it's
thankful.
fun. It was fun to do this with you.
Good. I'm glad. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Jill Monaco Show with Jenna today as much as I did. I want to offer you a free gift that will help you continue on the path of freedom. And all you need to do to receive it is to leave a review to the podcast and send a screenshot of it to me on my Instagram. My handle is @JillMonaco. To hear more episodes like this, be sure to subscribe to the show. That way, the most recent episode will always be in your feed and ready when you are. And if you'd like to help me continue to reach others, you can click on the link in the description and you can give to support the show now. You can find out more about Jenna when you go to jillmonaco.com. Just click on the show notes in this podcast to find all the links we mentioned today. And thanks for tuning in today, my friends. And remember, love well. You are made for it.